This morning, former Vice President Mike Pence putting some distance between himself and Donald Trump over the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol.
As I said that day, January 6th was a dark day in the history of the United States Capitol. But thanks to the swift action of the Capitol Police and federal law enforcement, violence was quelled. The Capitol was secured. And that same day, we reconvened the Congress and did our duty under the Constitution and the laws of the United States. You know, President Trump and I have spoken many times since we left office. And I don't know if we'll ever see eye to eye on that day.
Joining us now, attorney and contributing columnist for the Washington Post, George Conway. George, thank you for being with us and getting up so early this morning to do so. I just wonder what you think of the former vice president's comments here. Can he really split the baby on this, saying, you know, kind of downplaying the need for a commission or letting January 6th kind of ruin more than January 6th politically, as he puts it, and also say he doesn't see eye to eye with Trump without signing his own political, death notice?
Well, it really was a remarkable speech that he gave last night. I mean, he's just downplaying the most significant disagreement you could ever possibly have, which is whether or not democracy in the United States should continue. I mean, the former president basically he incited an insurrection that was essentially trying to stop the election of his successor. And Mike Pence, Vice President Pence, to his credit, stood up for the law, stood up for the Constitution. It's just not something where you can just say, well, we don't quite see eye to eye about it, like it might be whether or not you should spend $50 million more or less on infrastructure. It's just a remarkable attempt to downplay the significance of what happened on January 6th. And it's just crazy that he's doing that, and at the same time, he's going to think that he's going to harm himself. He's worried about harming himself by standing up for democracy is really just a depressing and stunning thing.
Yeah, democracy is not one of those things you can agree to disagree on.
Yeah, that's it, and that's crazy.
And also, I mean, the other thing is, to Brianna's point, I don't see how it helps him. I mean, he basically, even by saying, Donald Trump and I don't see eye to eye, isn't that enough to give the Trump base in the Republican Party, which is the dominant force in the Republican Party, enough to say he's not one of us?
Absolutely. I mean, the fealty to Donald Trump is running very, very strong. And as the polls have shown, a significant percentage of Republicans continue to buy into the big lie that Donald Trump propagated after the election. It's not in Pence's interest to really play this up, and he didn't really play it up. But at the same time, it's the elephant in the room, so I think he felt he needed to acknowledge it somehow.
So look, there is not going to be a commission, which it seems clear where Pence is on that. But there is going to be some kind of congressional investigation led by Democrats with subpoena power. Do you think Pence here saying, I don't see eye to eye with the president on January 6th, opens him up to potentially testifying?
Well, I think that whatever happens in terms of investigation, he's potentially a witness no matter what. So I don't know that him saying one thing or another is going to make a difference. I mean, his story will be that his conversations with the president about what President Trump wanted him to do that was frankly illegal, and then the story about what happened to him at the Capitol and having to hide. Well, I mean, that's pretty much a story that we already know. So I don't know that his testimony in that respect will add a lot.
He said some other interesting stuff last night. I want to play a little bit about that. The future of the Republican Party. Listen.
That if we offered a positive conservative agenda to the American people, we'd win back the House. We'd win back the Senate. We'd win back America.
Some people are saying he's trying to draw a line here, too, by not focusing on the last election, focusing on other things. But how do you see it?
Yeah, well, I think that's what a lot of the Republicans are trying to do. They're trying to make January 6th fall into a memory hole. And I guess you can't blame them because they've tied themselves to the mast of Donald Trump, and they basically tolerated him for 4 years. The Senate acquitted him of, I think, what were clearly impeachable and removable offenses in the Ukraine matter, and that allowed Trump to basically continue his misconduct into the election, promising that, basically saying all throughout 2020 that if he lost the election, it would be because of fraud. And then after he did lose the election, saying that it was because of fraud. I mean, this is a man who has no limits in terms of what level of depravity and falsehood he would pursue in order to remain in power. And fortunately, again, thanks in part to Mike Pence and thanks to others, that didn't happen.
You have your most recent opinion piece in the Washington Post that says, in part, 4 years of Trump have led to the Republican Party becoming a threat to democracy, a declining sect dominated by crackpots, charlatans, and cowards. Of these, it's the cowards, including the senators who killed last week's legislation, who bear the most blame. This is something I've thought about as you categorize, as we categorize the different kinds of Republicans out there. They may be voting the same, but their motivations are certainly different. Do you think that there is any ramification for the senators, the worst ones, as you put them, politically here in the coming years?
Again, I think there will be ramifications overall for the Republican Party. I think they're going to find it more and more difficult to create legitimately electoral majorities because people in the center or more rational conservatives don't believe that presidents should foment insurrections, and they don't believe that their members of Congress should tolerate that. And they don't have much room for error, which is why they lost basically both houses of Congress and lost the presidency. And I don't think that it's going to get better for them over time if they don't really stand up for rationality and reason and democracy.
And then there's the MyPillow guy, because it all goes back to the MyPillow guy. Because the former president, Donald Trump, is reportedly asking advisors whether or not he can be reinstated this year as president. MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, he's falsely saying that he can. Lindell also claims that he spoke with Donald Trump in recent weeks, I guess after Lindell was on the Jimmy Kimmel Show. What do you think is going on here?
Well, these, frankly, Trump is a deeply disturbed individual. And we saw that for 4 years. It got worse. And now, to indulge this complete fantasy that's been reported by multiple outlets that he's been discussing with people of being reinstated as president in August, it just shows you how out of touch with reality and how deluded he is. And it's just, this isn't rhetoric. It's not an overstatement. I mean, this is crazy, crazy stuff. And if if somebody did that and they were in a job of a CEO or any job other than, I guess, politics, and they uttered this kind of lunacy, they didn't run their own company like Trump did, and I guess MyPillow guy does, they'd be removed, and I think a board of directors would say, you need to get some help. But nobody's there to help Donald Trump because they're all afraid of him, and they're either trying to grift off of him or they're trying to just try to keep him from attacking them. And this process, which has gone on and gotten worse for 4 years, is basically leading to the unraveling of the Republican Party. And it's deeply undermining democracy. I mean, on January 6th was the product of people believing that an election was stolen from them. And now, I mean, there are people out there, adherents of Trump, I mean, who are, as this episode shows, thinking that somehow Trump will be restored, and they're going to be sorely disappointed again. And who knows what people who have been drawn into these fantasies are going to do.
Yeah, when does that conspiracy theory die? It doesn't seem like anytime soon.
He's never going to let it go.
And the people who believe him won't as well. George, it's great to see you, George Conway. Thanks for being with us.